Hey everyone, welcome to the Incubator Podcast. I'm your co-host Darren Boyd.
And this is Satbir, Sran. So today we have a very interesting guest, one that I've known for maybe about 7-8 years, as long as I've been here in my second trip out to California, or stint, I should say. We are joined by Daniel Hooper, who is a cybersecurity industry expert, been a leader in security for a number of years. I want to say probably 25, but I didn't really want to date you, Daniel. And in 10 of those being a CISO. But without me doing all of that credit for on your behalf, welcome, Daniel, to the show. Excited to have you with us. Can you share a little bit more about yourself and expand on that?
Yeah, thanks very much, Sabir. And thanks, Darren, for having me. But 25 years plus, a little bit plus in the industry. Grew up technical network system administration, Unix administration, if everyone remembers Unix systems. Kind of moved into security from a technical background. So didn't come from a software development background, but have written a lot of code in my past, led engineering teams, things like that. And, kind of got dragged into more of the governance, risk, and compliance over the course of my career as I've moved into more executive roles. And as you mentioned, the last 10 years in more of that executive CISO kind of role, working more closely with businesses. And I'd say probably the last, 5-7 years or so, really stepping more away from the technical role, getting much closer to the business, really understanding how businesses function and what the security teams can really do to support the priorities of the business. I think that's much more critical now than it ever has been in the past.
So Daniel, you just mentioned business priorities, and as a cybersecurity leader, as a CISO, clearly there's ongoing priorities you've had that just continue to evolve. And then there's the changing landscape or posture of cybersecurity on an enterprise. Where do you, as a leader, begin to focus or kind of prioritize your initiatives and focus areas in 2025?
Yeah, great question. And, obviously, I have to start with AI. That's where everybody's focused at the moment. It'd be amiss if we didn't at least mention that right off the bat. But I want to also build on a lot of the blocking and tackling that we've gotten pretty good at over the years. Identity, attack surface management, third-party risk management, vulnerability management, information security, cybersecurity, IT security. It's such a broad topic area. I'd really like it if someone could wave a magic fairy wand and solve vulnerability management for us. I hopefully can stop talking about that after 25 years in the industry. But obviously that still continues to be a challenge. I think we've gotten pretty good at blocking and tackling over the years and, being very reactive to, new threats and new incidents and things like that. What I'd really like to see is the continued shift into more, I think, proactive, more forward-thinking, more innovative, more automated sort of management and maturity of teams. And with that, I think AI provides a bit more of that opportunity for some of the automation. Obviously, it's very early days in that. We're still trying to figure out, what that's going to look like. And, when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So we're trying to figure out, what can we hit with that big AI hammer right now? And there's some interesting things that people are doing with AI right now.
Yeah. Maybe just to start there on with AI. Now, do you see there? Obviously, everybody's exploring with AI. Now, from a security perspective, you have to protect the organization from itself and all the users of AI itself, and put in, if you will, the compliance, the controls, and everything in place so folks can continue to experiment their use cases. And by the same token, how does the domain of cybersecurity itself leverage AI as well? So there's kind of like two parts. So how does an organization kind of grapple with that and not be a blocker, but an enabler?
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way of thinking about it. It's kind of those two sides of that same coin, right? There's the more traditional way of thinking about it from a systems, vulnerability, data protection, kind of business enablement, sort of the same mindset we've always had of how do we go to market or bring a new business solution forward, like a chat bot for customer service or something like that, a business enabler where we can surface PII data in some sort of automated chatbot type solution for customer service, but do it in a safe way. How do we enable that? How do we put guardrails in place? How do we maintain CCPA and GDPR compliance and data segregation, role-based access controls, that sort of stuff when we're dealing with a non-human identity and things like that in a safe way? We've got pretty good patterns around how we deal with those kinds of things. It's just applying it to a new kind of technology. On the flip side, though, as you talk about, how do we start to leverage AI for security teams in things like security operations centers, third-party risk management, security testing, application security, those kinds of things. There's some really interesting work people are doing around, leveling up security operations teams for investigation work using AI and things like that.
There's on that topic, I would love to get your take on this, because every time I wake up, I see in this arms race, somebody has made some major jump, and everybody just keeps jumping. We saw it with DeepSeek, we saw it with Quen, we saw it now with Kimi. We have now kind of democratized the ability to create an LLM with things like distillation and some cool fine tuning, which means a lot more people can either take this on and maybe take it on with good intentions, but maybe not have the tools or the capabilities to control bias, control direction. But we also it's now available for adversaries to do more with it. When you look at some of these major advances, I think this morning I saw the EU is pledging $200 billion in terms of AI programs. Obviously, the US has. China keeps jumping forward with some of these really, really cool models. Does that worry you? Do you start thinking, my goodness, we just allowed potentially adversaries to have these phenomenal capabilities? And how should we start thinking about this evolving landscape? It's monstrous.
Yeah, and I think, with every technology leap forward that we have, there's always that leap forward that the attackers have as well. And, I always come back to this sort of, off the cuff comment I made to an executive, to a board member once. And when they asked me, how do we get ahead of the attackers? And I said, well, you can't. You can just stay as close behind as you can, right? And it was a little bit off the cuff and a little bit glib at the time kind of thing. But, really, they've got an infinite number of resources and time and hours to spend researching how to attack firms. We don't have infinite budgets or infinite resources to figure out how to prevent them, kind of thing. So we can only do what we can, right, with the resources that we have and the cards we have dealt to us. So really, I think when there's these large technological leaps forward and you start to see adversaries using those technologies and things, it's really more of understanding how they're being leveraged, really keeping an eye on what's coming your way, what are you seeing on your systems, what, threat modeling out, forecasting, looking around the corner, doing those kind of risk assessments and things, and really trying to think about, from your business perspective, what does that really mean to you? It's really easy for us as security professionals to get really tied up in, like, oh my God, the attackers are coming, or the attackers are coming, kind of thing. Like it's very Chicken Little sometimes in our industry. And, old guy that's seen a lot of stuff can say that kind of thing. I've been on a couple of sinking ships and had to swim before. So, it happens. But, I think that, with every sort of leap forward that we take, it gives us the ability to really come back to basics and first principles and think, okay, what does this mean for us? How does it apply to our organization? How does this apply to my product, my technology, my business, my processes?
There was, again, I'd love to get some of your take on this. We've always seen a shortage in talent in cybersecurity. There seemed to be like quite a deficit of getting skills into the market. Then I see the advance of AI, and there's another massive shortage in talent and understanding. You kind of combine those ideas, and it feels like we're not necessarily equipped to stay in the game. Is replumbing your skills one of the top things an organization should start to get behind? How do we do that? It didn't feel like we could keep up with some of the skill shortage in cybersecurity to begin with. And now we have all these new influences. How do you think about the people problem in this? And is there some guidance you could give to organizations that are thinking it through?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the default setting a lot of people have when they think about cybersecurity skills is that they have to go and acquire a full-time individual. And I think that usually in my mind, hiring a full-time person for a problem is usually the last step in my mind, because it's really understanding, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Is there a skill gap on the team? Is there a capability gap on the team? Is it a short-term need? Is there a training opportunity? If I'm looking at a team of say 10 people and I need to add one more person because there's a skill gap on my team, maybe someone on the team is already doing some of that work and I can just leverage them in a slightly different way, whether it's through a promotion or an additional job responsibility or training course or something like that. I can level them up and maybe level up a couple of people so that I don't have a key man risk or something to cover a capability gap. If it's a short-term need, maybe it's a contractor or a consultant or something like that, like a contingent worker of some description. If it's a longer-term project, like a 6-month, 12-month thing, maybe it's a contractor or something like that. Maybe it's an outsourced relationship you need, like an MSSP or something like that. So you go through this hierarchy of needs almost before you finally arrive at, okay, I definitely need a full-time person. There's been a shift in our business. There's a shift in our control requirement. We lost someone on the team. It's a backfill opportunity. We're building a brand new capability we've never had. We're expanding the team because we're expanding the business, because we're expanding relationships or something like that. Yes, now I need to grow the team. I think this sort of skill shortage and the sort of FTE shortage and the hiring problems that people have, I think people take a fairly myopic view to hiring requirements in the industry sometimes. They're not looking at what the capability requirements are, and they're really purely looking at, hiring full-time employee only sometimes on teams. Like, if I was to start a brand new role with a brand new company that's growing a team and they said, we've got 5 people on the team and we need double the size of the team. And if I'm brand new starting that on that, in that role as a CISO, I'd say, well, why? Like, and I think some people would walk in and say, great, open 5 recs, let's get 5 people on the team. I'd say, well, what are they going to do? Are they doing IAM? Are they doing vuln management? Are they doing AppSec? Like, what's the plan? Like, why are we hiring 5 people? What are they doing? Are they painting the outside of the house? Like, what's the plan here, kind of thing? You need to figure out what you need as far as capability goes before you can go and acquire those skills.
Yeah.
I need to ask one more, because I don't get access to Daniel's very often. It used to be younger in my career, I used to look to folks like a CISO and say, wow, one day I would love to be there. Now, like we have done some work in various theaters, and there's an accountability now that is in certain theaters of operation, there is a civil consequence of cybersecurity going wrong. And so now I look at those same folks and say, well, I'm glad it's them. Thank you for being brave. I wouldn't want to go near that post. Because of the accountability that now falls on folks like yourself, and it can be fairly, like, there's punitive, there's all sorts of potentials. What keeps you interested in staying in that fight? I'm just personally curious, what motivates you when now there could be some real damaging consequences to somebody sitting in that position? What motivates you to stay in that role?
Yeah, I think those consequences have always been there. I think they're a little more publicized than what they have been in the past. I think if, a company got hacked in the past, things roll downhill. And so, heads roll. There's always consequences to decisions and risks that have been accepted without being communicated, without being signed off. And there always has to be a scapegoat somewhere. There always needs to be blood in the water a little bit. So, I think it's always happened. I think it's just been a little more publicized now. I think definitely with, NYDFS and SEC and folks like that, I think companies are reacting in a way to try to appease some of the regulators. I think the CISO role being elevated closer to board members now. D&O insurance covering CISOs is great. I think the legal liabilities that CISOs have now is becoming a lot more real, for sure. So, third parties being able to directly target an executive like a CISO is something fairly new in the past few years. So that is absolutely an elevated risk for sure. But as far as the pressure goes of the role, it's not new. It's been around forever. I think it's just changed slightly. It's gotten a little worse, a little more, a little more troubling, a little more worrisome for sure. But yeah, it's always been part of the role, though.
Let me try to connect the dots here. We talked about just the we'll say called the risk a CISO takes on in the position and or liability. Then to your previous comment about planning for the organization, the teams, the staffing, and everything like that. Well, it's a chicken or egg situation, because if you walk into an environment or you're dealing with an environment where there's potentially chaos or uncertainty, like, okay, well, I need more men on the post, right, manning the fence or the wall. And on the other hand, you could throw people at it. But I would also say, or maybe perhaps the question is, Daniel, is there enough data that an organization has or metrics so that a CISO can make those informed decisions about, well, what is my risk, right? And we've worked with a number of clients and enterprises where we find that understanding of actual risk is a little blurred, right? And that risk then needs to be also quantified, so you could prioritize both not only the resources, but where you overall invest your energies to protect yourself. So, just transitioning those themes into how does a CISO evaluate risk, and what are you seeing in organizations, given you've been there or are there, and how do you deal with that risk, and then how do you manage your organization and respectively resources?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, even for technical CISOs or non-technical CISOs, we all manage risk every day, right? I mean, we're all focused on, whether we're focused on adversarial threats and implementing better controls, or whether we're focused on compliance activities to meet regulatory expectations. We're managing a risk in some way, shape, or form, kind of thing, of either getting hacked or meeting regulatory or business expectations or customer expectations. Some way, shape, or form, there's some risk of missing something, kind of thing, and there's a consequence to that. So I was actually talking to a friend of mine who's a CISO the other day, and we're talking about how to show measurable improvement over time. And I've had this situation in the past when, talking with board members and other executives, and they said, okay, well, if we gave you, X number of more people, like if we flooded you with resources, what would you do with these resources? And it's like, well, actually, I could use a couple of new people, but if you flooded me with resources, I wouldn't be able to put them to work, because I have a large dependency on a lot of other people in the business. And this is why, right? So even if you gave me 100 people, if you tripled the size of my team, I wouldn't be able to use them because I'm dependent on a lot of other things. And this is why. And I have to be able to tell that story based on risk, and it's risk to the business. So if you are, manufacturing cars in a plant, right, and you flood that manufacturing plant with people, it doesn't mean that you're going to make cars faster. It just means you're going to gum up the process a little bit, kind of thing, right? So what you need to do is build another factory somewhere else, kind of thing. Or you need to make that process more efficient or something like that. So I think understanding what the risks are, understanding where to put the resources, understanding where to spend the money is much more important than just throwing people at the problem.
There's I guess every area in cybersecurity seems to be just blossoming with new challenges. One of them we see often. I want to get your take on this. Is when we talk about third-party risk management, there's everyone now is that we at least interface with is trying to master this new manufacturing paradigm, which is software. And in that construct, we're creating all these channels called APIs to access our data and services. And a lot of those are internal, and those can be abused. A lot of those are external. They can certainly be abused. We have third-party integrations now that are like just a massive explosion. We're seeing, and this is nothing new, but I think it's growing. SaaS consumption is through the roof. People are starting to think about data contracts and how we can start to control this. But we have some massive exchange points, which equates to massive attack surfaces. How do you start thinking about that world? And do you start from an outside in and start to curtail the risk that is external? Do you start with an internal out? How do you even start to frame up how we're going to start to measure something like a third-party risk?
Yeah, third-party risk is a really interesting topic because I think it's a lot of people have approached it with the third-party risk assessment, and everyone's due diligencing each other to death at the moment. I think that's been going for a few years right now. We're relying a lot on SOC 2s. I was actually talking to someone yesterday about SOC 2s and how valuable they are, and or whether we should be relying on them or should we not, and that sort of stuff. And I think it's like a lot of things. It's a great starting point to be able to show that there's a level of maturity, there's a foot in the door, there's a level of expectations and things like that. So it's a great way to standardize a certain level of control that we have in the environment, if you will. But I think there needs to be a level deeper than that. We've got our security scorecards, and we've got vendors like that are looking outside. They're looking at attack surface. They're looking at hygiene. They're looking at things like that. Everyone's got their own third-party risk management program internally where they look at certain things. They're doing their own vendor scoring. They're looking at criticality based on various dimensions of, I'm sharing PII data, it's critical to a business operation or something like that. But the problem is we miss things. There's certain vendors that you're not sharing PII with that you might not think are operationally significant until they have a ransomware event and they're offline for a month. And all of a sudden, a certain part of your business grinds to a halt that you didn't realize was actually revenue generating in a reasonable sized way. And now board members get itchy because all of a sudden 10% of your revenue stops flowing, kind of thing, because you have what you thought was a low risk vendor because you're not sharing PII with it. And so you've misscored that vendor. Turns out it actually adds 10% to your bottom line, but you didn't know that. So I think, third-party risk management, I'd love to see us move away from due diligencing each other to death and swapping third-party questionnaires and figure out a better way to standardize that. And I know there's a few vendors that are trying to do that are trying to build more of a consortium approach to this, where you can answer a questionnaire once and then have other folks rely on that. And it's, feels like a SOC 2 or some form of industry certification type of thing, like a PCI compliance type of thing where you can rely on that. And so, it'd be great if we could move in that direction and say, oh, if you've got this one thing, like ISO, SOC, PCI, whatever it is, some sort of security certification, then I don't need to do a due diligence on you. I can just trust that you've got a good program and we can all move forward with our day. That's great. It's going to save a lot of time and resources for folks. But I think you still, from a third party, from an internal perspective, from a CISO or a security team's perspective internally, you still need to understand your business and understand your third parties. Like you said, SaaS, right? What are you sharing with those SaaS providers? If you have GDPR or CCPA requirements, you have customers that are expecting that data to be deleted when they request it, or a subject access request, like a data subject access request. Can you surface that data to them in a timely manner or not? Or are you going to run afoul of some of those processes and those expectations because you don't know how to get that data from them quickly enough? So there's these nuances to the way these businesses need to work with their SaaS providers, not just from a third-party protection point of view, but from an integration and a business process point of view as well.
Is there a call to action here from your vantage point? Are you issuing a call to action really to the community to do some more of these consortiums? Is there something behind that where, look, if you really want to help me in my position, I need more people to bind together. Is there something there that you would want to kind of issue to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love that. I think that'd be great. And I've talked to a few startups that are in the third party space that are trying to do just that. And I think what they've bumped up against is that, everybody would like to think that they're special and unique, that their business is special, they have unique requirements and things. And A lot of times they do. I mean, that's why every business is different. They compete in their own market spaces. They have their own unique products and things like that, right? That's what their differentiators are, and that's why they're in business and hopefully being successful. Uh, but when it comes to cybersecurity, we're all largely fighting the same fight. We're all largely trying to protect the same things. We're all dealing with a very similar adversarial threats. We're all dealing with insider risk. We're all dealing with external threats. We're all dealing with vulnerability management and patching. We're all dealing with the same kinds of things. We're all trying to protect sensitive data from being exfiltrated by a malicious party kind of thing. So I think we're largely dealing with the same kinds of things within a unique business itself. So I think there is a call to action here for us to think about third-party risk management from the perspective of how do we demonstrate to each other in a counterparty kind of risk management way that we have a mature security program, whether that's through SOC 2, ISO, PCI, whatever that combination of certifications looks like and standardization on that looks like. And I'm not advocating for yet another certification, but I'll let the certification bodies figure that one out. But is there something that we can rely on? And then what's that nuance for your business look like? And that is really where, if I'm coming to work with you, what's unique about my relationship with you? And that's where we need to spend the time talking. If you've got a SOC 2 and a PCI certification and stuff like that, that's great. I probably don't need to ask you too much about your security program, but I do need to talk to you about, how can I integrate with you for a data subject access request so I can get the data within a certain amount of time kind of thing. Or, how can I talk to you about, I don't know, whatever it is, transferring data, or when we want to separate our relationship, how do I get my customer data back, or something like, whatever my requirements might be for that. So the nuance of the relationship, I think, is where we should spend the time, and less on the 1 month diligencing each other on cybersecurity.
So I think we could carry this conversation on pretty much all day and pick your brain, Daniel. There's clearly a lot out there in this domain, and again, from the visibility or purview that you have as a leader. However, all good things must come to an end. Are there any parting thoughts that you have, Daniel, as a leader, to offer your colleagues, the cybersecurity community, and things of that nature? Just parting thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think as folks look at their security teams, something I've been talking to more people about from a capabilities perspective, identity management, vulnerability management, security operations, as these three things are coming together, identity becoming more of the perimeter. Network isn't the perimeter as much as identity is anymore. Zero trust isn't about an edge anymore. It's more about perimeter. To Darren's point, SaaS has extended the perimeter of our traditional networks and data centers. And so I think as folks are looking at their capabilities in their security teams, as they kick back in their chair and look at the sky and think about their programs, think about security operations becoming less about responding to alerts and more about responding to changes in posture, more about how the integration of SaaS and AI changes the posture of your program, where vulnerabilities are cropping up, red team exercises are introducing potential risks, incidents and threat intelligence is informing controls that need to be changed, and creating more of what I would call like a security center of excellence or something like that, rather than the traditional siloed security operations, security engineer, vulnerability management, identity management, the traditional silos. Think about it more as a collective center of excellence, I guess.
I think that would be a really good topic next time, if we can convince you to come back. The is to how do you mature an organization? Maybe how do you start from zero in some cases to, hey, you come into the middle of a new org. How do you view that? How do you build some of these centers of excellence? I think that'd be a wonderful topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives with us, and we look forward to having you back soon.
Cool. Thanks very much for having me.
Thank you.